This lesson's going to be about setting up and getting ready to write some JavaScript code. So covering all of the essentials that you're going to need, including an editor and a browser, and how to access your developer tools within the browser, creating an HTML file, and then creating some simple JavaScript statements in order to output some content within the document page, as well as to add an alert pop-up window when your page loads. And this is all done with JavaScript, and we're going to be covering this and start coding in this lesson. I've got my editor opened on the left-hand side. The editor is going to be the place where we're going to be writing our code, setting up an HTML file, and this HTML file can then be used to host the JavaScript code within it, and the HTML file is the one that we're going to run within the browser. And I'll show you how to link to the JavaScript shortly. You are going to need to have an editor in order to write code. The suggested editor, as well as the one that I'm going to be using, is Visual Studio Code. So this is a free open source editor. It runs on Mac, Windows, and Linux. So if you don't have an editor, if you're looking to use the same editor that I'm using, you can head on over to code.visualstudio.com and download the editor and do an install of the editor. So you got the editor set up, then you are also going to need to have a browser. The browser that I'm going to be using is going to be the Chrome browser. And one of the benefits of the Chrome browser is that it comes with developer tools. So you can open up on any web page and click anywhere that's open on the page and right click on a Windows machine or control click on a Mac, and that will open up the pop-up window menu where you can select inspect, and then that will open up the dev tools, and from there you can select from the elements, and the second tab in is console. You can also customize how the developer tools are showing up. So going to the three dots, you have an option to set it to dock to the left, to dock to the right, which is the default, or you can dock it to the bottom. For most of the lessons of the upcoming lessons of this course, I am going to have it docked to the bottom. You can also pop it out in a separate window. There are some settings that you can select. There's also more tools, more options to customize your experience with the developer tools. So I'm going to be just using the standard setup, a console, and this is where we can interact with the JavaScript code from our web pages. There's another way to open up the dev tools as well. So if you close it and you go in the top right hand side where you've got the three dots, and under the three dots you've got an option called more tools, and if you scroll down to the bottom of that menu it says developer tools, and that's going to open up the developer tools window. You can also use the shortcut in order to open up the developer tools. So that's going to all open up the same windows, and from here you can write some JavaScript code, do an inspection of your existing code, and communicate with the developer console messages coming from JavaScript. So once you have your editor installed, you can go ahead and open up a new file. And if you are using Visual Studio Code, you're going to get presented with a welcome screen. So this welcome screen gives you some options where you can learn more about the Visual Studio Code, where you can customize your environment. There's some help options down at the bottom. And in order to create a new file or a new folder, you can click under the start. There's option also to open a folder, and then if you've got some recent work, you can select those recent files to open those. You can also, from the file menu at the top, where you can create a new file and then add it into a folder and a workspace. So let's go ahead and we're going to create a brand new file and save this file as index.html within a brand new folder, and saving the file as index.html. And close the welcome tab. And I'm going to close the other two files that I had opened earlier. Let's go ahead and we'll set up this file as an HTML file, specifying the doc type, and then creating the HTML tags, opening and closing tags, as well as the opening and closing head tags, and as well as the opening and closing title tags. And I'll call it JavaScript Course. And then within the body of the tags, this is where we can add in a div, and we can make some interaction later on with JavaScript for this div. So I'm going to just give it a class of output, and this can just be a blank div on the page. So once you've completed that, you can save that, and now you've got an HTML file that you're ready to add some JavaScript code into. If you want to run it into the browser, One of the easiest ways with Visual Studio Code is to just drag it over to the browser, and this will open up the file locally, running it at the local address that you have on your computer. And you can also open it directly from that address by selecting the file and opening it within the browser. Now let's add in some JavaScript to this file. And there's several places that you can add JavaScript, where you can add in the script tags anywhere within the HTML code. So typically you will have the script tags in one specific spot, either at the top of the page within the head, or either just before you close the body, depending on what your JavaScript is doing. If you're interacting with the content of the web page, creating an interactive web page, then best is to place the JavaScript code at the bottom before you close off the body tags. So wherever you place the JavaScript code, this is where the code is going to get run. So if we do something like a document write, and I output a value of hello world using the document write, and refresh the page, this will add in that particular output wherever the JavaScript code is added to the page. Above the output and within the output, let's just fill that in to say output, and now I refresh it, I'm going to have the first hello world above, and the second hello world is going to be below the output area. I'll make it a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. The script tags will allow us to run the JavaScript code within it. So the JavaScript code is the code that's actually contained within the script tags. And when we're writing JavaScript, we can either use the script tags and have the code directly within the same page as the HTML page, or we can link it out to a separate JS file. And there are some benefits to linking it out to a separate JS file, and one of them is that you can reuse the code across multiple pages, or even on the same page, that every time you call to that script, it's going to run the script within that place. So let's go ahead and we're going to add in the script file. So we're going to create a new file on the same directory as index.html, and we'll link out to that JavaScript code, and then we're going to render the JavaScript code the same way that we just did, but it's going to be sitting within a separate file. So we're going to separate out the HTML and the JavaScript. So create a new file, going to call it app1.js. Take that exact document write content, place it within the app1.js, and instead of having code within the script tags, I'm going to use an attribute where I'm going to link out to the source and select the JS file that I want to use as a source for this JavaScript code. This is going to do is, this is using the script tags to link to a JS file, and it's going to render out the JavaScript code just as it would if it was sitting within and between the script tags. So let's refresh our HTML page, and we see we still get that hello world 2 output being rendered out from the JavaScript code. So for the JavaScript, it actually doesn't matter if it's sitting within the HTML with a separate JS file, it will still render it out. The point at which it gets rendered out is whenever the HTML file is loading, it's going to hit the script tag, and then at this point, it's going to go over to the app1.js and load the code, run the code, and then continue and complete the running of the application. So if we were to have a second element, and I'll just call this output 2. This can be output 1. We refresh the page, and within the app1.js, we're going to do what's known as an alert. So this is a little pop-up message that you will see whenever the page loads. So let's run the code again, and this is our pop-up message that says that the page says hello. And notice that behind the scenes, the rest of the content of the page hasn't finished loading, as we haven't finished and closed off the body content yet until we let the JavaScript complete running. So what's happened is that the code has come in, it's read the HTML code, so it's added in the title there at the top, and it's outputting the content, but before it can finish outputting the content, it's rendered and connected to the JavaScript code, which is running this code here, where it's not going to complete running the code until we hit the OK on the alert. So the alert is stopping the rest of the page from loading until we hit OK, and then it's going to finish rendering out the rest of the code on the page, including writing the JavaScript and including finishing off the HTML. So that's why typically when we do have JavaScript, if there are any issues with it and we're linking out to a separate file, we try to keep it at the bottom so that at least all of our web page content will load. And if we're throwing an error, if it's having trouble connecting to the JS file, then it's not going to interfere with the output that's being displayed to the user from the page. So go ahead and try this out. Create an HTML file and then link to a JS file. You can use the document write to output some content on your page. In addition, you can output using the alert and have the little pop-up window from the alert text. And you can be ready to move on to the next lesson.